Hello, this is Helen Mottee, and I want to welcome you to For Eternity.
I put my heart in your hands and you taught me to fly.
Hebrews 13, verses 1-3 exhorts us to let brotherly love continue. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some have unwittingly entertained angels. Remember the prisoners as if chained with them, those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are in the body also. I would like to invite everyone who is listening today to find a few moments to go to Google Earth and type in North Korea at night. I did this recently, and what I saw was a sobering physical representation of the spiritual, political, and economic darkness that envelops this country. From space, North Korea is literally a black hole, with but a few twinklings of light shining out from within the capital of Pyongyang. There is virtually no electricity for the country's estimated 25 million citizens. And whilst surrounding countries like China and South Korea are lit up like proverbial Christmas trees, North Korea is enfolded in a blackness that tragically and graphically portrays the oppression and suffering of its people. In December 2012, John Metcalf wrote in his post a new highly detailed image of North Korea's lack of electrical infrastructure. The residents of North Korea entered an extended age of blackness in the early 90s when the Soviet Union collapsed, taking with it Pyongyang's source of cheap communist fuel. Power stations fell into disrepair, leaving the country at a dismal 71st place in the 2009 worldwide ranking of national electricity production. South Korea is 12th. He continues, "The world has known of North Korea's night invisibility for a while. On imagery captured by military satellites in the 90s, the country shows up like a gaping hole in the flaming latticework of light that is Japan, South Korea, and China. NASA has featured material on its Earth Observatory site, pointing out that North Korea has fewer lights than the Yellow Sea, where glowing fishing vessels appear to form a line as if marking a watery boundary between nations." Metcalf poignantly sums up his article by saying, "Pyongyang has a probable population of more than 3 million people, but you wouldn't know it looking down on the city from space. Only the faintest of glimmers rise from the metropolis, as if all its residents are huddling in the dark for their supreme leader's surprise birthday party." In a post dated April 10th, 2012, Anthony Watt's title carries a dark irony that also aptly describes this black hole in which our brothers and sisters are existing. He writes, "A new high-resolution look at North Korea, where it is Earth Hour every night." Last week, we journeyed together to North Korea, the most difficult and oppressive country for Christian believers to live in. We found out a little of what it would be like to be a North Korean believer and the price we would most likely pay for being a follower of Jesus Christ. In this second part of our program, we will take another journey, that of a North Korean refugee attempting to escape this black hole of suffering and persecution. The words refugee and asylum seeker have become increasingly inflammatory and divisive over the past several years. For many of us, we understandably associate these terms with boat people coming across from countries such as Indonesia, and all the subsequent hype and debate that make up this Pandora's box of controversy. But for me, the word refugee has taken on a broader and much deeper meaning in recent years than the narrow perspective that the Australian news media delights in feeding us. Last year, South Korea's Database Center for North Korean Human Rights estimated that as many as 200,000 North Korean refugees are hiding in China after fleeing persecution and starvation in their homeland, and that many lack legal status and access to basic social services and are susceptible to human trafficking. Thus wrote Jung-min No in an August 2013 article titled Doors Slam on North Korean Refugees. But why have so many North Koreans risked and are risking their lives to escape their homeland, to possibly face equal or even worse difficulties than if they stayed? Let's listen to an account of life inside North Korea from a woman who defected shortly after Kim Jong-un came to power.
My family had decided to commit suicide because for 3 days we didn't have anything to eat. We'd decided to starve to death. We said, let's die. But then I wanted to survive. I sold the house for 30 kilos of rice. To survive, I had to eat grass. People pick grass and leaves. They use them to make soup.
What do you think of Kim Jong-un, and what do you think of what he's threatening to do?
Kim Jong-un is trying to be more extreme than his father and trying to distract the North Korean people from their own problems and complaints.
Here are some statistics compiled by THINK, which stands for Topple Hunger in North Korea. Organised by the Korean American Coalition, it is a program organised to inform the public about famine and humanitarian issues in North Korea. North Korea's population is 22.7 million. More than 1 million North Koreans perished in a devastating famine in the mid-1990s. Nearly 300,000 people have fled North Korea, one of the most isolated and dangerous countries in the world. 33% of the population is undernourished. 37% of children are stunted, 23% are underweight, and 7% are wasting away. Up to 200,000 are unjustly imprisoned in Soviet-style gulags. Prisoners in these camps experience extreme abuse, torture, rape, forced abortions, and even executions. More than 400,000 have died in these political prison camps. Up to 300,000 refugees are hiding in China, and this is a very conservative estimate. Approximately 80% of North Korean refugees in China are women. Of these women, 70 to 90% end up sexually trafficked, sold repeatedly, or forced into marriages. These women can be bought for anywhere from a few $100 US up to 2,000. And specifically relating to children, 60% of North Korean children experience malnutrition, which can lead to illness, stunting growth, or death. 37% of North Korean children are in need of food aid, chronically malnourished, or have stunted growth. 23% of North Korean children are severely underweight, while many lose their lives from malnutrition. 20% of North Korean children suffer illness from malnutrition, like diarrhea or respiratory infection. If you lived in a country like that, would you be tempted to undertake a desperate journey, crossing illegally into China, risking exploitation, abuse, and possible imprisonment and repatriation, to at least be able to get enough food to eat for yourself and your family? Here is another interview.
We had to cross the Tumen River, but the water level was high because it had rained a lot. The current was strong and fast. We knew that we would be killed if we had stopped there, so we had no choice but to jump into the river. We crossed at night. I only have one leg, so I had to swim with my remaining leg and my crutches. I was sinking and thought I was going to die there and then, but my brother came and helped me cross the river. That's how we managed to cross the border.
Ji Song-ho fled North Korea in 2006. He arrived in the south 6 months later after travelling 6,000 miles across Asia. He left with his younger brother, their aim to be reunited with their mother who had escaped from the north. They were among just over 2,000 North Koreans who defected in 2006. In 2011, the total number of defectors to have fled the regime topped 23,000.
When we defected, my father couldn't come with us. He was very ill at the time, so it was impossible for us to take him with us. He was still alive when I made it to South Korea. When I was in Thailand, I called him, but the North Korean authorities were closely monitoring him and his home. No one was allowed to visit him because the police found out that we were missing. That's as much as I knew when I arrived in South Korea. It takes 6 months for a North Korean defector to formally become part of South Korean society and obtain a social security card. I didn't know it would take so long. I thought I would be able to get my father out of North Korea as soon as I arrived in South Korea. I called my father 6 months after I arrived, but found out that he had died a week earlier.
Ji's father tried to escape the country, but was caught by North Korean soldiers and tortured. He returned home but died 3 days later. Ji's father made him a pair of wooden crutches to use during his escape through China. They are his only remaining possessions from North Korea.
We got to eat meat twice a year on New Year's Day and Korean Thanksgiving. We never got to eat beef though. You would be executed. Cows are used for farming. Obviously they are stronger than humans. When cows die, they are delivered to Pyongyang so that senior government officials can eat their beef. Ordinary citizens are not allowed to eat beef.
Another defector shares,
The good thing is that we can pursue our dreams in South Korea. I worked in North Korea for 4 years before coming here. In North Korea, you basically have to work at an assigned job all your life, whether you like it or not. Unless your family is part of the elite group, then you can do whatever you want. In North Korea, it's like they have royalty. The royalty, they can get any job they like, but normal people have to do whatever they are assigned to do. That's the reality in North Korea.
Ji then says,
When I was 16, before I graduated from school, I was involved in a train accident. I had no hope in North Korea. Disabled people are treated like dogs. Even if you die, they don't care.
Ji is now studying law. He travelled 10,000 kilometres from North Korea to get to South Korea. Chinese soldiers near the border try to stop North Koreans entering China illegally. Many defectors are sent back to North Korea and many die on their way to the south. Ji says it would be better for one of us to live than for us to die together. So they all took different routes. Ji and his brother were finally reunited in Thailand after many months. We have heard a tip of the iceberg account of what sort of life an ordinary North Korean has if he or she is not a part of the small elite class considered royalty, who have privileges undreamed of by the majority of their fellow Koreans. So what if you are a Christian in North Korea? You can make the decision to try and escape into China, like so many of your countrymen before you, or you can decide to stay and live as part of a growing underground church which is willing to pay the ultimate price for being a follower of Jesus Christ. As we heard last week, being caught with a Bible or Christian materials can earn you swift execution. Meeting together is illegal, and if one has small children, even praying or singing aloud is dangerous, as an innocent remark in a schoolyard or on the street can lead to a living death in a political gulag for 3 generations in the family. And yet the true church is alive and well, and even believers imprisoned for their faith will take great risks in the camps to tell people about Jesus. Listen to Norman McLaughlin from Open Doors Australia tell us about Hey Woo.
Yes, incredible little lady, little dynamo of a lady, full of energy, 70 years old. She was here last year with us. She, in 1997, her daughter, who was in her early 20s, if you know anything about North Korea, there has been a lot of famine because of the communist system, the economic mismanagement. There's been a lot of famine and a huge number of people have died of starvation. Hey Woo's daughter went out one day to find food and found some food and brought it back, and as she was bringing it back to the family, she was robbed. And she came home with nothing. And over the next weeks, she starved to death. And Hey Woo and her family watched her daughter starve to death, 1997. Soon after that, Hey Woo's husband, and they were not a Christian family, went into China, crossed the border to get food, came back, but found Christ in China because he met Chinese believers there who led him to Christ. And when he came back, he was arrested and imprisoned, and Hey Woo actually never saw him again. And he died after just 6 months in prison. Some of the folks who'd been in prison with her husband began visiting Hey Woo and talking about his faith that he had found. And she couldn't believe that her husband had become a Christian. And then she remembered that when she'd been young, she'd remembered her mother had a cross round her neck. And she remembered her mum used to go through the house muttering under her breath and realised that her mum had been praying. And through this, Hey Woo came to faith herself. A couple of times she tried to escape to China. Both times she was repatriated and spent years in North Korean labour camps, which she describes as being worse than having the 10 plagues of Egypt all at once. But one of the most radical things that she did, there's, as you've said, North Korea is the number 1 worst persecuted country in the world, where you can be just killed on sight for being a Christian. In those labour camps, she prayed and she said, Lord, I don't have any fellowship. I'm on my own. And she felt the Lord was prompting her to share the gospel. And so in that North Korean labour camp, she began to talk to folks that she would pray and look around and see who she should talk to. And she shared Christ with a number of people, each of whom came to Christ. If she picked the wrong person, she would have been dead on the spot. And she began this little meeting in the toilet block. She talked about the stench was just horrendous, and they could go there to silently and quietly worship together once a week because no one else would come near this place. And so they had this little fellowship in a North Korean labour camp. Is there anywhere in the world that is a more dangerous place to plant a church than inside a North Korean labour camp? So just an incredible story. And as I've said, little dynamic little lady, full of the Lord, full of passion and enthusiasm for the gospel, and now living in South Korea.
In prisoners' chains, with bleeding stripes, Paul and Silas prayed that night, and in their pain began to sing. Their chains were loosed, and they were free. I bless your name. I bless your name. I give you honor, give you praise. You are the life, the truth, the way.
There is another story that also needs to be told, which is part of the North Korean refugee exodus. Many North Koreans who cross into China are being taken in by Chinese Christians who not only feed and shelter them at great risk to themselves from Chinese authorities, but share the gospel of Jesus Christ with them. These refugees can stay in a safe house for weeks, even months, and some who become believers are now making the most extraordinary decision of all. Instead of proceeding on through China to eventually arrive in South Korea, where a life of freedom and plenty awaits them, they are deciding to turn around and go back to North Korea as one-way missionaries to share the life-giving gospel with their family and friends. Why are they being known as one-way missionaries? Because to return to North Korea guarantees them eventually either prison or death. These are our brothers and sisters whom the world, and tragically most of the Western Church, will never hear of or care about. The ones who have taken up their cross literally to follow their Lord. These are the ones who are willing to lose their life in order to gain eternal life and to hear the words of their King, "Well done, good and faithful servant." The question that is haunting me as I hear and read their testimonies is, does Christ expect any less from me? There are also believers who risk their lives in different ways. They have dedicated themselves to crossing borders and taking in Bibles and other much-needed materials to the Christians inside North Korea. I would like to read you a passage from the book The Privilege of Persecution by Dr. Carl A. Moyler and David W. Hegg. The chapter is titled Prayer and Dependence. The Yalu and Tumen rivers form a naturally meandering boundary between the People's Republic of China and the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. The two rivers, flowing from the Changai Mountains in northeastern Asia to the northern shores of Korea Bay, are shallow and heavily silted for much of their length. Yet they are much easier to navigate than the political lines they help delineate. Night and day, soldiers from both armies stare vigilantly at each other through high-powered field glasses as they control traffic in and out of their respective countries. Those approaching the Chinese checkpoints find that travel moves at a snail's pace, for each is high risk and high security, and very few people are allowed to cross the heavily fortified border regularly. Behind the Korean border, the situation is not much different. There are checkpoints everywhere. Travelling inside North Korea is almost impossible. But one man does go around the country. To those of us in the West, he is known only as the Traveller. He is one of the persons who helps Open Doors distribute goods inside North Korea. Despite the ever-present danger of exposure, the traveller remains an unpretentious and simple man. He looks more like a blue-collar factory worker than the Korean James Bond, but that's one of the keys to his success. He's adept at blending in, remaining both vigilant and decisive. It's a matter of survival. He has served Open Doors for years, and yet we don't even know his real name. We never will. The fewer people who know it, the better. For if his secret work on behalf of God's people were ever to be discovered, it would mean a brutal death sentence for him. When Open Doors leaders spoke to him, we asked him what the church in North Korea prays for. This ostensibly emotionless man who puts his life on the line every day, often for people he's never even met, being in cities he's never visited, began to weep. He told of a church movement that has remained underground ever since the 50s. In order to wipe Christianity from the face of the land, Kim Il-sung's soldiers herded entire congregations into the streets and ran them over with bulldozers. Thousands of men, women and children, nearly all of them North Korean citizens, were literally crushed to death, their remains compacted, recycled and used to line roadbeds throughout the surrounding cities. Today, under Kim's son, Kim Jong-il, there are between 200,000 and 400,000 believers, direct descendants of those who were left behind, and when they pray, the traveller said, theirs is a prayer of repentance. Ironically, their genuine and sorrowful penitence doesn't correlate to anything they've done personally, nor is it even rooted in a tragedy of their generation. Instead, it grows out of a collective sentiment that their grandfathers were not bold enough witnesses during the years of the Japanese invasions and later during the communist takeover. They feel as if the punishment of communism for the last 60 years has been because their ancestors did not speak out enough, and they live with such an intense, inherited guilt that they actually view as a daily reminder from God to not compromise their faith. And they deal with that daily reminder the same way they do everything else, with prayer. It's simple. Believers in North Korea and those throughout the persecuted church don't see prayer as an add-on activity. It's not like they have a relationship with God and they pray. Theirs is a praying church, and their relationship with God is a prayer relationship. It is completely integrated in a way that ours in the West just isn't. To them, prayer is simply communion with God, and they have a wealth of experience that we have seldom tasted or enjoyed the benefit of. When they come together for corporate prayer, it's almost sanctified desperation. Someone leads out, and then everyone in the room prays passionately, often multiple times. They pray for things we probably wouldn't think to pray for, and never pray for many of the things we do. Much of our prayer comes in response to a dutiful call to improve our lax spiritual disciplines. We're supposed to pray in our church services, so we do. We're supposed to pray for our food, so we do. Quietly and quickly, especially if we are out in public. We rarely have to pray out of a sense of dependence, and so we often don't. Admittedly, few people in the West even like to pray. The question of enjoying prayer never comes up in other parts of the world. North Korean believers are prayerfully focused on one purpose: to be in place and fulfill God's will for their lives. Their prayer is a prayer for liberation, for lifting of the darkness, for a possibility to reopen the churches of their ancestors, and for reconciliation. So despite the dangers, the traveller continues to equip believers with commentaries, Bibles, radio resources, training and encouragement to keep them focused on the Lord. In a country where a church is completely underground and believers rarely meet, believers often pray alone, but they pray with one voice. The traveller knows that if there's ever going to be freedom there, it will be because of prayer. Already, Christians are free in Christ.
the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked. Blessed is the man who doesn't stand in the sinner's way, or sit in the seat of the mocker. Blessed is the man, blessed is the man, blessed is the man, that man for his delight is in the law of the Lord. Blessed is the man, that man he meditates on the word both day and night. And he shall be like a tree that's planted by the streams, which yields its fruit in a season, and whatever he does will prosper. All that he does succeeds. His leaf shall not wither. Not so the wicked. They will be like chaff that the wind will blow away. The wind will blow away. Therefore the wicked man in the judgment will not stand, nor the sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For God watches over the way of godly men, but the way of the wicked, their way will perish. Blessed is the man for his delight is in the word of the Lord.
Many of us will have at one point in our lives read George Orwell's 1984. I remember reading it in my late teens, and although aware of the brutality of totalitarian regimes through history classes and the experiences of my mother's family as White Russians during the Revolutionary War in 1917, this book still remained in its essence a fiction work, imaginatively crafted by a skilled writer. I particularly recall the fact that every house in this brave new world was fitted with a television monitor that broadcasted government propaganda 24/7. This could never be switched off, only turned down in volume. Everything and everyone was constantly monitored, and the entire population existed in the grey, relentless certainty that nothing was certain, and all that the regime daily broadcasted was true, until proven otherwise. North Korea is that Orwellian world, but so much more horror-filled and beyond the imagination of us in the West. And its political prison camps? We know they exist. Satellite images confirm that. But all our information about what happens inside them has come from North Korean defectors and ex-prison guards. Let me read you from Blaine Hardin's book, Escape from Camp 14, the true story of Shin Dong-haik, the only human being born in a North Korean prison camp ever to have escaped. North Korea's labour camps have now existed for twice as long as the Soviet Gulag, and about 12 times longer than the Nazi concentration camps. There is no dispute about where these camps are. High-resolution satellite photographs accessible on Google Earth to anyone with an internet connection show vast fenced compounds sprawling through the rugged mountains of North Korea. The South Korean government estimates that there are about 154,000 prisoners in the camps, while the US State Department and several human rights groups have put the number as high as 200,000. After examining a decade of satellite images of the camps, Amnesty International noticed new construction inside the camps in 2011 and became concerned that the inmate population was increasing, perhaps to short-circuit possible unrest as power began to shift from Kim Jong-il to his young and untried son. There are 6 camps, according to South Korea's intelligence agency and human rights groups. The biggest is 31 miles long and 25 miles wide, an area larger than the city of Los Angeles. Electrified barbed wire fences, reinforced by guard towers and patrolled by armed men, encircle most of the camps. 2 of them, numbers 15 and 18, have re-education zones where some fortunate detainees receive remedial instruction in the teachings of Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung. If prisoners memorize enough of these teachings and convince guards they are loyal, they can be released, but they are monitored for the rest of their lives by state security. The remaining camps are complete control districts, where prisoners who are called irredeemables are worked to death. Shin's camp, number 14, is a complete control district. By reputation, it is the toughest of them all because of its particularly brutal working conditions, the vigilance of its guards, and the state's unforgiving view of the seriousness of the crimes committed by its inmates, many of whom are purged officials from the ruling party, the government, and the military, along with their families. Established around 1959 in central North Korea, near Kaechon County in South Pyongyang Province, Camp 14 holds an estimated 15,000 prisoners. About 30 miles long and 15 miles wide, it has farms, mines, and factories threaded through steep mountain valleys. Although Shin is the only person born in a labour camp to escape and tell his story, there are at least 26 other labour camp eyewitnesses who are now in the free world. They include at least 15 North Koreans who were imprisoned in Camp 15's Edification District and who won their release and later turned up in South Korea. Former guards from other camps have also found their way to South Korea. Kim Yong, a former North Korean lieutenant colonel from a privileged background in Pyongyang, spent 6 years in 2 camps before escaping in a coal train. A distillation of their testimony by the Korean Bar Association in Seoul paints a detailed picture of daily life in the camps. A few prisoners are publicly executed every year. Others are beaten to death or secretly murdered by guards who have almost complete license to abuse and rape prisoners. Most prisoners tend crops, mine coal, sew military uniforms, or make cement while subsisting on a near-starvation diet of corn, cabbage, and salt. They lose their teeth, their gums turn black, their bones weaken, and as they enter their 40s, they hunch over at the waist. Issued a set of clothes once or twice a year, they commonly work and sleep in filthy rags, living without soap, socks, gloves, underclothes, or toilet paper. 12 to 15-hour workdays are mandatory until prisoners die, usually of malnutrition-related illnesses, before they turn 50. Although precise numbers are impossible to obtain, Western governments and human rights groups estimate that hundreds of thousands of people have perished in these camps. Most North Koreans are sent to the camps without any judicial process, and many die there without learning the charges against them. They are taken from their homes, usually at night, by the National Security Agency. Guilt by association is legal in North Korea. A wrongdoer is often imprisoned with his parents and children. Kim Il-sung laid down the law in 1972. Enemies of class, whoever they are, their seed must be eliminated through 3 generations. North Koreans who make it into China, as we have already heard, face hardships and challenges which are a universe removed from the comfortable lives we live here in Australia. China is hostile to North Korean defectors and in fact refuses to acknowledge them as genuine refugees. For blatantly political reasons and to not risk jeopardizing her relations with the dictatorship, China views all North Korean refugees as economic illegals and therefore has an agreed policy with Pyongyang to send back refugees caught within its borders. China has also refused the UNHCR access to its border with North Korea to assess the true state of these economic migrants. In the midst of these human rights travesties, there is, however, hope and light emanating from this darkness and tragedy. Individuals and Christian and human rights groups are not only speaking out for the oppressed and persecuted, they are involved in an underground railway which helps North Korean refugees get to the West. The story of this extraordinary movement is captured in Melanie Kirkpatrick's account, Escape from North Korea, the untold story of Asia's Underground Railroad. Here is an introduction to whet your appetite to read this book and to pass it on to others. It is a crime to leave North Korea, yet increasing numbers of North Koreans dare to flee. They go first to neighbouring China, which rejects them as criminals, then on to Southeast Asia or Mongolia, and finally to South Korea, the United States, and other free countries. They travel along a secret route known as the New Underground Railroad. With a journalist's grasp of events and a novelist's ear for narrative, Melanie Kirkpatrick tells the harrowing story of the North Koreans' quest for liberty. Travellers on the New Underground Railroad include women bound to Chinese men who purchase them as brides, defectors carrying state secrets, and POWs from the Korean War held captive in the North for more than half a century. Their conductors are brokers who are in it for the money, as well as Christians who are in it to serve God. Just as escaped slaves from the American South educated Americans about the evils of slavery, the North Korean fugitives are informing the world about the secretive country they fled. Escape from North Korea describes how they also are sowing the seeds for change within North Korea itself. Once they reach sanctuary, the escapees channel news back to those they left behind. In doing so, they are helping to open their information-starved homeland, exposing their countrymen to liberal ideas and laying the intellectual groundwork for the transformation of the totalitarian regime that keeps their fellow citizens in chains. So what can we do here in Australia to remember our brothers and sisters in North Korea as if chained with them? There is much we can do. We can choose to be aware and to know what is going on. We can proactively and passionately share this information and the testimonies coming out of North Korea with all who cross our path. When we know, we can pray specifically and fervently. We can give sacrificially towards the printing of Bibles and Christian materials and the providing of physical needs such as medicine and food. And we can go. Yes, there are even opportunities to visit Pyongyang if you are convicted you are meant to go. Let me close with the poignant remarks of Tim Peters, a dear personal friend of ours and one of the most passionate and daring advocates for the plight of North Korean believers, as he addresses the Seoul Press Centre on July 25th, 2013. Helping Hands Korea Catacombs is intimately aware of the names and faces that make up this nebulous term, North Korean persecution. We know this both through our work of helping the persecuted church inside the nightmarish secret state. However, we are also fully aware of the excruciating consequences of persecution when new Christians, those who come to embrace faith in Jesus Christ as refugees in China, are forcibly repatriated to the DPRK by Chinese authorities. This horrific and illegal practice includes repatriation of children and pre-teen orphans who have escaped the state institutions of North Korea, which are a mockery of actual social welfare facilities for homeless children. I wish to argue at this timely juncture that the persecution of North Korean Christians does not only take place in the Kwalizo, as well as other detention centres and SSA bureaus within the DPRK. It has already been firmly established and documented that Christians are categorically and systematically abused in these places. I submit that North Korean refugees who have come to embrace the Christian faith as refugees in China are also persecuted by virtue of the repatriation policy of China. Any North Korean refugee, whether Christian or not, has a well-founded fear of persecution when repatriated to the north because they departed their country without government permission. Please note that newly converted North Korean refugees have a double reason to tremble in fear at the coming wrath by authorities, since Chinese authorities routinely provide their DPRK counterparts background information, including contact with Christian missionaries, on captured refugees that are being repatriated. In effect, by virtue of the policies of two nations, outright Christian persecution by the DPRK and forcible repatriation of Christian refugees by the government of China that has full knowledge of the inhuman treatment that Christians will face after repatriation, we can say that North Korean Christians are the victims of persecution by state fiat. That is, by virtue of the policies of two nations, the DPRK and China, which acts as an enabler of the persecution policies of its neighbour. It is imperative to combat both sides of this persecution.
Do you know what it's like to be on the run? Do you know what it is to leave it all behind at the point of a gun? Do you know? Do you know how it feels to lose your family? Do you know what it is to have been free, but now to be a refugee? I'm a refugee, I have no choice, I have no voice. I'm a refugee, I have no place, I have no face. Will someone look at me? Do you know what it is to have no rights? Do you know what it is to keep on hiding through an endless night? Do you know? Do you know how it feels to hear a mine explode? Do you know what it is to see your child blown apart on this going nowhere road? Do you I'm a refugee, I have no choice, I have no voice. I'm a refugee, I have no place, I